Good evening. 7 o'clock. All the selectmen are present and are accounted for. We'll start by transmitting Treasury warrants 37, 37A, 38, and 38A.
Move the warrants as read by the chairman.
I'll second.
Motion made and second. All in favor? Unanimous. We have no meeting minutes to approve. We'll go right to our 7 o'clock appointment with James Cobb, the president, and John Doherty of the Wilmington Rotary Club, and Christina Stewart, our library director. Good evening. Are you here bearing good news?
Yes, we are here bearing good news. It's our honor as Rotarians and in the town of Wilmington to serve the community and the world as a whole. But tonight we're here for a special occasion to present a donation of $10,000 to benefit the Wilmington Public Library. And it's to support technology, infrastructure, and improvements there. And Tina said she'd be a little more specific as to the use of the funds.
First, on behalf of the library, thank you to Wilmington Rotary for this is very generous donation to the Wilmington Memorial Library. As Jim said, we will be earmarking this money for technology. Specifically, we'll be putting a self-check unit in a children's room. And as you know, in the FY12 budget for this year, we are asking for 50% of the cost of that, and this will give us the other 50% match. So on July 1, we'll be able to move forward with those plans. The other project that we're working on, which we're very excited about, we're involved in digitizing our retrospective microfilm of our town crier. And with this digitation project, we'll be able to make the town crier available online back to the mid-50s. So we're working on that. We are working with town council and with the publisher of the town crier to move that project forward. So we're excited about that, and these funds will help us see that project through. So we're very excited and thankful for this generous donation.
Very nice. Any questions or comments from the board? Outstanding.
I can only say what a great job your staff and you, Tina, that's doing with the library. From where it was 5 years ago till now to present, outstanding job. And again, thank you to the Rotary again for helping the library, not only with service, but to the all needs from elderly down to children in that library that benefit from it. So thank you.
Yeah, well said, Ray. I want to pay special tribute to what the Rotarians are doing in Wilmington for the library as well as organizations throughout town. So thank you, gentlemen, and all that you represent for all the efforts that you do for the town of Wilmington, and especially for the library here this year. I'm excited about having access to, at least ready and easy access to the archives of the crier. I think that'll be fun reading, just to sort of get a better sense of our history. So I hope for me as well as everyone else in the community. So kudos and thank you again very much.
Very good.
Maybe we should get a photo.
Sure.
With the chairman, with the three of you and the chairman in the front.
Big plastic chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our 7:10 appointment is with Chief of Wilmington Police Department, Michael Pagonis, for discussion of warrant articles 22, which is the curfew bylaw, 23, regulation of junk dealer bylaw, and 24, regulation of pawnbroker bylaw. Good evening, Chief.
Good evening. Thank you for asking me here tonight. It's my understanding that a couple of these bylaws have a lot of questions from the community, so this will give the police department an opportunity to address some of those issues and questions that they may have, and maybe be able to clear up a couple misunderstandings or problems that weren't clear. in our intention. So, the first bylaw is the curfew in public parks and grounds, playgrounds and fields. And that bylaw consists of basically 5 sections. A definition section, a curfew and hours, curfew section with hours and exceptions, signage. It addresses juveniles, the potential for arrest, and the penalty throughout the bylaw. If you look at the bylaw as it's written, the intention of the police department in proposing this bylaw and working with town council and drafting it was a lot of the signage throughout the town on different parks and grounds, whether it be the beach out here, the high school fields, that signage is pretty inconsistent. And a lot of the signs don't even give hours of operation. They basically say that daylight, no use after daylight. Some, like the high school, I believe, gives an 11 o'clock deadline. What I wanted to do was make them consistent across the town so that everybody could understand clearly what the expectations were. And I kind of view it to a certain extent as setting reasonable limits as to the use of town-owned property when folks are out there. You know, we don't leave the town hall open 24/7 or the library. Most other towns have restrictions on public use of parks and grounds, and it usually runs around the daylight hours. What we're experiencing is we have large group of kids in different, like the Justin O'Neill Park, which has received a lot of damage over the years, and it's difficult for us because it's set off the street. And when we come to speak with a group of kids that are out there, if they're damaging it, by the time we get there, they know who we are, they know why we're there, they usually stop what they're doing. And to ask them to leave without any definitive answer as to what the rules are and they aren't, it makes it difficult for us. It's the same kids repetitively throughout town that we have the problems with, and I felt that this proposal of this bylaw would give us standards. When we raise our kids, we have expectations, we have to articulate those to them, and I feel it's the same way with the police department. When we're dealing with the youth out, we should be able to clearly define what the rules are for them using the town parks and the playgrounds. So that being said, when we drafted the bylaw, I wanted to be pretty clear that it did not include places like the cemetery. I know that's a misconception out there that it does include the cemetery. This bylaw does not include the cemetery. If you look at the definition section, it discusses A through D as far as definitions, and that is public parks, playgrounds and fields, juveniles, and town-owned property. And I think the misconception comes from that last section D under town-owned property. And if I could clear that up, hopefully, by making a few comments, that definition of town-owned property is there for the other two, the A and B, which are the first two definitions, public parks. And it basically states a public park shall mean town-owned property, and that's why the subsequent definition is there. It does not include anywhere else in the bylaw town-owned property, such as the cemetery or areas like that that are out there, and certainly we want to respect the townspeople in being in those areas. Public parks and playgrounds and fields are designed more towards the recreational use. And when you look at the actual curfew and the hours, it sets a standard of 1 hour after sunset and 1 hour before sunrise, which I have a chart that we pulled up. There's a great difference in time throughout the seasons as to what that would be. And just to 1 hour after sunset, in the beginning of July, the end of June, would be 9:30 roughly at night. I'm not exactly sure that that's an inappropriate time to say that kids shouldn't be on the soccer field out behind the Shawshene School or out here in the middle of the field or behind the concession stand, which receives a ton of damage over the years. And of course, because of daylight savings time, that time does reduce dramatically, but we don't usually have a lot of use with kids on the fields in the middle of January and December when they're covered with snow. and it's typically not a problem. The problem areas are like the Justin O'Neill Skate Park out here behind the town hall, areas like that in the town park areas where we're constantly moving people out after hours over the summertime for various reasons. Whether they be drinking or hanging out or doing whatever it is they do out there, it becomes a problem for us. So the police department's looking for that clear standard. There are exceptions to the bylaw. There's a exception for permitting. So if you have a permit to be there and you've gone through the appropriate authority, whether it be the recreation department or the school department, to be on the field and doing what you're doing, then that's not fine. You just have to give them notice ahead of time. And some of these issues address other things that we've dealt with, like the powder puff games, unsanctioned games, and things like that that happen throughout the town that my understanding is clearly the town really doesn't want them to occur, and we move those people along quite a bit. It gives us an opportunity to say definitively to those folks, this is what the recourse is and you can't be here. The next portion of that deals with lighting. So if there's controlled lighting at a venue, then it wouldn't be included in that 1 hour after sunset issue. In places like that, or like the high school basketball courts, kids play there in the evening most times. But as in anything, there should be an appropriate time to say, enough's enough for the night. You know, it affects the neighbors, and we get the complaints, and we respond to those, and we try to deal with that. We're looking for a mechanism for us to say, this is the rule. And so it's definitive, and it's across the board that every kid that we run across understands that. So there are exemptions built into the bylaw itself. The other area of the bylaw would be signage. My goal is to make the signage consistent throughout the town. Like I said earlier, we've done studies. Officer Matt Stavro did a study for me, and he took pictures of a bunch of different locations, and they all pretty much say something different. There's nothing really consistent about them, and my request is to make them consistent with that signage section. One of the other things we looked at, one of the only mechanisms we might have in a situation like this, is if there's repeated issues or problems. The police department in the past has notified kids that they, if they return, they'd be trespassing. I'm not exactly sure that that's a message we want to give to the kids or an issue we want to deal with the kids. If they do return and they have to notice of trespassing, they're subject to arrest. And that's where this extra section comes in with procedures for juveniles in parental responsibility. Understanding that young kids make decisions that sometimes will reflect poorly on them 10, 15 years down the road. We're trying to take the criminal mechanism for a violation out of the realm of possibility for the officers to take action. So what we're trying to do is say, okay, you can't be here, and we're going to notify your folks that you were here after hours. And if there's a second subsequent offense, the parent would receive the fine, not the kid. So there'd be no record on the juveniles going forward when he's trying to get into college, 5, 6 years down the road, and he wouldn't have a criminal record. And that's kind of built in there as well. The violations for the first offense are $50, and it increases to up to $200. There is a mechanism for arrest, but it does not include juveniles. The actual fine doesn't go to the juvenile either. It'll go to the parent or the legal guardian after notice that the kid was in a location they shouldn't have been. So I don't know if you want to ask questions one at a time on these articles and do it.
Yeah, you all said, I think that would be a better way to do it. Any questions or comments from the board?
I appreciate the clarification regarding the cemetery. Everything else, I think you're pretty much reiterating what the points you had made at the public hearing. From the town standpoint, town needs to be able to take care of its property and to prevent problems from happening and having some accountability for it. So it makes sense to me.
It's not different from what any other town does. It just depends on the mechanism they use to enforce it. A lot of towns have signage, and the Board of Selectmen, who are usually their parks commissioners, will set certain hours of operation. And then the town proceeds with a trespass violation if there's an issue. Other towns like Barica, they have a bylaw with some of this language, and it gives them some type of action that they can take. In doing this, we didn't want to burden the juvenile over the long term. So, I mean, this is unique, I think, in this aspect of it, for the area.
Gentlemen, any questions, comments?
Brief question. You said this doesn't include the cemetery. What is, are you handling that separately or elsewhere in any of these other bylaws, or what is the rule about hanging around in a cemetery? Because I understand that if the kids aren't able to hang around back here, they may find other locations.
Sure. That's the difficulty of it, because I don't think that any law that specifically identifies a certain class or a certain specific group of citizens would pass muster on the legal realm. I don't think you can kind of pick and choose who you keep out. We don't usually have an issue with juveniles in the cemetery. I mean, it does occur. You see it on the news quite often where, you know, they'll do things to the graves and damage the stones and stuff, and it's very disheartening. It's a very solemn area, and we don't want to prohibit anybody from going in and paying their respects to their family members or being in there. And it also is used quite extensively from time to time as a place for people to walk and exercise. But I don't want to be the person picking and choosing who we talk to and who we don't. You know, I think that would be a burden that the police department would be interested in pursuing and questioning. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I hadn't thought about it in that context. I'm embarrassed to admit to you, Chief, as well as to my colleagues here, that I assumed that this kind of regulation was already in place, whether it be in the form of bylaw or you know, a regulation that you're in. So for me, it seems almost kind of a common sense set of standards, set of guidelines for not only the residents and the people of Wilmington to abide by and live under, but also for you to be able to do your jobs effectively. So I'm in support of it, and I appreciate you helping us understand it better.
Thank you. I think consistency in the message that we send, because there are regulations out there now, but I just think consistency is the key across the town, and that was the effort of this bylaw also, was to make them consistent.
Ray, you good? Yeah. Questions or comments from the audience?
You know, Mike Bodman.
Mike Bodman,
Chief,
yeah.
I commend you on this article and clarifying it for the board tonight, and I noticed the conversation you and I had a week ago about the cemetery, clarified it. But now, I have a couple of small questions to ask you. In your petition article there, I don't know, after so many offenses, whoever violates them is subject to arrest. Do you have that in there somewhere?
No, there is an arrest proviso within the bylaw, but what we really tried to do was, the juvenile can be brought to the police department after refusal to give a name. So say if the juvenile refuses to talk to the police officer, I'm not telling you who I am.
But now...
we could bring them, but the purpose of bringing them there is to have their parents come get them, because they're not obeying the lawful direction of the police at the time. And if the parents don't show up, it's kind of a legal issue at that point, because then what do we do with them? I mean, I don't want to be keeping juveniles at the police department. So the mechanism kind of follows mass law, where you notify the probation officer, juvenile probation officer, and they make arrangements for the child at that point, for the juveniles.
That's the juveniles now. As far as adults, basically adult is in theory responsible for his own actions. A hypothetical situation or question. If someone is arrested, now is that classified as a misdemeanor or a felony?
It's
a $200 fine, and that $200, wouldn't that bring it up to a felony level?
No. No, I don't believe so.
No? Okay. Then
I mean, you're talking the difference between property crime and other things, and that $200 or $250 range would make a property crime from a misdemeanor to a felony, but in this situation,
No, I'm thinking...
it'd be a bylaw violation is basically what it is.
Basically, the juveniles would be probation and the likes. What I'm thinking of, kids violating the law, they're young and everything. I don't want to see something go on their record for future job applications. So that's exempt in a roundabout way?
Yes, for the most part. I mean, that's the attempt of this bylaw, is to not give them a criminal record and give us other mechanisms to use, which don't exist in other communities. I can tell you that, other towns, their only option is to arrest the individual, and hence they get a delinquency record at that point. That's not what we're looking to do. We're looking to temper that and give us another option and kind of, put the onus back on the family to make sure that the juvenile is doing what they should do.
Could I ask you one last question? It'll be real quick. What laws are in effect at the present time as far as kids hanging around playgrounds, high schools, school laws?
There aren't any, unless they've been given notice that they're trespassing, and then there's an issue after that.
That's basically, so you could send the boys down the lot tonight, and they don't have any teeth. They can bark, but they don't have anything.
There is signage throughout the town, but it's inconsistent, and this is kind of a comprehensive bylaw to bring everything together, to clean up the inconsistencies, to be able to offer an alternative to addressing juveniles in situations, and to give the police officers a clear mechanism of enforcement if there becomes an issue. A lot of times we get the phone call. We get the call from the residents, and we come out and we're kind of, our hands are tied to a certain extent in responding to that. So we're trying to put all that into perspective and address it in a way that, I think best fits the town of Wilmington.
Well, I'm sure it's an ongoing problem at the present time, and this will clarify matters.
That's the whole thing.
Hopefully. All right, thank you, guys.
Mr. McDonald?
Well, I just want to thank Mr. Bodnar for those questions, and, let Mr. Bodnar know that I will be voting for him for school committee. And, but I do have some problems with this particular bylaw. Number one, the chief mentioned that the parents will be paying a fine, and I don't think that's going to hold up in court. The other thing is, we're paying a lot in legal fees right now, and what's going to happen is the chief's going to be diverting his men to this area. If he does arrest them, it's going to go to court. They're going to slap him on the hand. It's going to cost us more money in legal fees, and it's a nice attempt, but it's going to fall short. But the real question that we need to have answered is, we have some officers that I was told were allegedly involved in crime, and the FBI...
Mr. McDonald, that has nothing to do with this article. That has nothing to do with this article that we're talking about here tonight. No, it doesn't. It has nothing to do with...
Control your own men before you control the little kids, okay? Simple as that.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? Thank you, Chief, on Article 22. Over Article 23.
Article 23 and 24 are kind of co-joined because they're almost identical in many ways. One addresses the business of taking in second-hand articles as a dealer, and the other addresses specifically pawnbrokers. And if you look at the language, they're pretty much identical throughout, outside of the kind of the definition phase, the first paragraph. And the reason that we are pursuing this, we already had a second-hand articles bylaw in town. It didn't give the police department everything it needed in order to pursue criminal investigations. The difficulty of this is this is a legitimate business, and these folks, are out doing a good job and trying to raise families and do this. The unfortunate aspect of it, their customers or people come in that use these legitimate businesses. Some do it for legitimate purposes. Somebody says, I don't want my my iPod anymore because I got a new one. I'll bring it down. See if I can get some money for it if they'll pick it up. The difficulty of it is this is a situation where many individuals who steal articles use these legitimate businesses for their intent to gain money for the products that they've stolen, for the items that they've stolen. And Chris Neville, who everybody knows is a lieutenant in charge of my detective bureau, spends countless hours at the police department going through the very information that we would look to cull from these two bylaws. The names, the addresses of the individuals, the descriptions of the items that they're turning in for the money. And we're finding a large amount of these items are stolen. We're able to prove that they're from house breaks in various communities. Right now in Wilmington, we really don't have a mechanism. It's kind of a honor system, so to speak, and it doesn't always work to the effect that we want it to work. Our concern is that, you know, if a legitimate business is engaged in this type of business, that's great, and we support them 100%. This kind of protects them in such a way as well, because if they take in something that's stolen, they're kind of out at a loss for that. If we come down and say that's stolen property, I mean, the police department's going to end up taking that and holding it or returning it to the individual, and whatever money that business paid out, they lose. This is a deterrent, pretty much, to a lot of the folks that would come in and try to sell stolen goods to those individuals, as, you know, as a benefit to them, so that they're less likely to have to give us something that they paid good money for, and take a loss in their business on that. I know it's tough to look at a bylaw and say this is a win-win for everybody. I'm not going to say that. But what I am going to say is that we need to hold accountable the individuals that would steal your property and then go make money off of it in a legitimate source. So if you look through these articles, it comes up, each article has a definition section. The application process is consistent. It goes through the Board of Selectmen as the licensing authority. Filing and expiration dates, abandonment if they no longer do the business, records and inspection, signs, hours of operation. That's kind of the meat and potatoes of what we're looking at here. And basically what we're asking is if someone comes into one of these consignment stores or a secondhand dealer, is to give us the time and date of the transaction. Name the street and address of the residence, or the date of birth of the person entering the information, the dollar amount transacted, a description of the article, and photographs of the article. Also, to specifically identify the individual bringing the property in. And I know that appears to be a burden on the storekeeper in that situation, but in the interest of helping everybody, the police department as well as the individuals who have been victimized by breaking entries and things like that, I think it's a small price to pay. So with that, you know, it gives the police department the opportunity to go in and look at the books and the records, and a mechanism for us to handle stolen property if we come across it. Previously, we didn't have many specific sections on how we would go through that process, the signage, you know, the comings and goings of people in and out of the building, and I think these, you know, it's a good feeling when you can recover that family brooch, and we do it all the time, and hand it back to somebody whose beloved grandmother gave it to them, and it was stolen out of their house. And I'm not saying that's the only business that these folks have, but I'm saying that this is the area where people that do B&Es go. And if they know you have a lax community, or you don't have specific laws or language in your community that prohibits certain things, or just at least puts a check and balance on it, then this becomes a community where these type of businesses could be victimized themselves. And we're looking to close that. This is not something that just Wilmington does. This is done in many, many, many communities. Like I said, Chris Neville processes probably 10 of these things in the metro Boston area on a regular basis, and I would say every last one that he goes through comes up with something where there's an individual that we can identify stolen property on these. It's done on a regular basis. So, I mean, this is kind of the impetus. We now have another location in town that's opened up, Cash for Gold, and it's our intention to, you know, gold is at a very high price right now. I mean, people can make a lot of money on it taken in as a secondhand thing, but, I mean, they can make a lot more if they know it's stolen in that situation. So, with these bylaws, they give us the opportunity not only to keep the bad guys honest, but to you know, protect the storekeeper and the citizens at the same time. So it's not necessarily a win-win from everybody's perspective, but from mine, I think it's, you know, it's a very well drafted bylaw. And the other one would be the pawnbrokers, which the dealers in secondhand goods pay cash for the items, where the pawnbroker could not only pay cash, but they could put it on loan. so they could hold it for 15 days or 30 days, whatever their requirement is. And then at the end of the 30 days, if the individual doesn't come back and pay back the loan, then the storekeeper would keep the item. So that's why they're two different sections. They're actually covered by two different Mass General laws. But the Mass General laws don't give us all of the tools that we need to be able to further our purposes as the police departments.
Very good. I think the photo identification and transaction form may be a burden to somebody that's going into a place to sell some property that wasn't his. He may have stolen from somewhere, so I think that's the only thing I could see causing a burden, or who would cause a burden to. I think if somebody was looking for a couple extra bucks and selling their iPod or whatever, they wouldn't have a problem taking the extra 5 minutes and making sure everything's on the up and up.
I understand it's an additional requirement on the storekeeper, and I can respect that, but I don't think that it's going to be that unduly egregious to them where it's going to eat up their whole day.
Right.
And they have a line of people out the door where they just can't process the amount of people that want to use this type of service. There are a lot of legitimate operations out there, and they're very hard-working people that, every dollar is precious to them, and I understand that, but there's a lot of people that will use that to their advantage out there as well.
That's right. Any questions or comments from the board?
I'd just like to make a quick comment, if I can, just for information purposes. I noticed, I got to tell you something, Kevin. We live in the same neighborhood, and I noticed every time you always put down the police department, you always put down the fire department. I'm going to tell you something. 3.5 years ago, I had hernia surgery. I came home 2 days later. We're calling 911. They helped save my life. I got rushed to the hospital. My hernia eruption. Come to find out, I ended up with a double pulmonary embolism, a blood clot in both lungs. I'm lucky I didn't die, and I got to thank those guys rushing me to the hospital. I've had people break into my restaurant, and I've had to go down because of the alarm. The police are there. They go in there to make sure I'm safe, to make sure they go in my restaurant. That way there's no one inside. I don't know why you continue to do that, and it's a disservice to this community when every time you put them down, and I got to say it, I know we live in the same neighborhood, but, there's a lot of good that goes on in this community. You never seem to acknowledge that. And I want to thank the police department and the fire department. They mean a lot to this community. And that's what kind of sparked me to lose some weight, too, because of what happened. And you don't get a second chance too many times. I put a lot of things in perspective. They saved my life, man. And that means a lot to me. And I don't know why you continuously bust their balls every friggin' time. And it really bothers me when you do that. It really does. That's all I got to say.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. McCoy, as a taxpayer, we would like our selectmen to be responsible enough to not cover things up. We would like them to be responsible enough to protect our money from being wasted. And one thing that I didn't hear you explain was that when somebody calls for an ambulance, the Wilmington ambulance shows up, then they got to call a real ambulance, because for a long time, there's been no leadership.
Well,
okay, no, I let you finish. I let you finish.
Yeah. I don't see it.
The Wilmington ambulance cannot administer life-saving medication. They have to call a real ambulance with paramedics.
Mr. McDonald, I'm not going to let you continue this, because every time you have a public forum, you hammer the police and the fire department, you say the same things over and over again.
It's disturbing to me when somebody from out of town says, what is Wilmington, Heroinville, or Crackhead Alley?
No.
We had 40
Again,
cops. We had 40 cops when Mr. Carr became manager. We now have 48 police officers.
Mr. McDonald, no, we're done. We're done talking about this, okay? We're talking about the articles, okay? I'm not going to let you do this here tonight. We're here to talk about the two specific articles. That's what we're doing.
Mr. Chairman, I will say one thing if I could. Thanks to the town manager, we have more fire, more police, no Prop 2.5 override, no increase in taxes on permanent 2.5. I don't know too many communities have done what we've done, and we've done a pretty damn good job running this community. That's all I'm going to say.
The town of Wilmington is supposed to be a non-profit corporation, all right? It's piling up money, all right? And people are being hammered in.
Do you have any more questions on this article? Let me finish up with the board.
Okay.
Hold on a minute. No, I'm going to tell you to hold on a minute. We'll do like we do every night after every meeting and every question. Any more questions or comments from the board?
There's one over there.
I'm sorry, Ray, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Chief, so in other words, the shop next to the Colonial Park Mall, basically, if someone came in, they came in with an item, they basically would have to show their license, take the license, fill it out, possibly take a picture of that person that bringing in the goods, and would it have to stay like, not for so long before it can be sold, but it could be sold as of the time they bring it in, is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
And the same, so if a buyer comes in, now will he'll have to fill out the same? And, where, in other words, show just the one bringing in? Thank you.
If I may, to complement that question, because I was going to start with that as well. We talked about the burden on someone coming in potentially to sell an item, and also the burden on the shopkeeper a little bit. So that I understand, or at least I think it says it here, but I want to have it, I guess, restated. The shopkeeper, I'm looking at 23.2.2. The shopkeeper is responsible for capturing information from the seller of the item. But the shopkeeper isn't obligated, or you're not asking that there be a reporting, like at the end of the week, a complete report of all transactions be compiled and sent in, or at the end of the month, a report of all transactions. You just want the shopkeeper to maintain records on his premises so that if there's a reason for Officer Neville or any of the other reports to go in and be able to review those records. Is that accurate?
Yes, and this is where we differ from a lot of other places. Some communities require the individual operator to provide the police department the information.
That to me would be a cumbersome kind of burden on a small shopkeeper.
Well, I mean, if the information's there, it's a fax or an email, however that's, in today's day and society with technology, it's not as difficult as it might appear, even making a copy of it. But, the inspection of the books is an important thing. And we inspect a lot of books. I mean, quite frankly, the pharmacies are all open to police inspection administratively, and that's what this is. It's not a search. This is an administrative inspection, which is kind of standard in the state of Massachusetts and every other state in the United States. They have administrative inspections on a lot of issues. So similar to like a building inspector coming in and verifying that it's administrative. It's not a Fourth Amendment search in that type of context. So like I said, it is a small burden on the shopkeeper, but I think something that benefits the community as a whole.
Indeed. And lastly, I don't know if it's here or if you have other code that you can talk about. This doesn't cover internet sales. My understanding is this really just covers storefronts, someone with a sign over that has their store in the premises of Wilmington. What do we do, or what mechanisms do you have in place to help sort of take a bite out of the internet crime?
The only way that they can the only way they can legally operate in Wilmington is to collect this information. Mm-hmm. If they're going to take secondhand products, and it's usually gold. Gold is at a premium price right now, and that's what we're seeing a lot of. People are stealing jewelry and then sending it. It's getting, pennies on the dollar and getting melted down, and it's often out of the United States, typically in a lot of situations. In the criminal enterprise of it, in the legitimate enterprise of it, I mean, they certainly do make good money off gold if they take it in, because they're going to take it at, buy it at a low rate and sell it at the market rate. So I mean, they make okay money on the situation. That's basically the intent of this, is to kind of control that and coordinate it. If somebody's going to send something in from the internet, it still has to be logged in and done properly, and require that they get a photo ID. So if they can't do that, then they can't necessarily in Wilmington take it in on that type of situation.
Thank you.
Over the internet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jeff? Do you have anything, Mike? Questions or comments from the audience? Yes, Mr. McDonald?
Okay. My view is that this business is a business that's entitled to free enterprise. The amount of work that the police department's going to have to do on this is extraordinary, and the amount of work that the pawn shop is going to have to do is probably going to have to employ another person. Okay, logically, if you think about it, somebody who goes and rips somebody off is not going to go in there and say, "Let me give you my name. Here's my picture. Here's where I stole it from. Give this to the police department." All right? So for the chief to put an unjust burden on a free enterprise business, I think he's just wasting his time when he could be catching some drug dealers.
I think that, I thank you for your comments, because you kind of accentuate what I've already said, that it is a win-win in that situation. You're probably right. The typical individual that does steal probably won't come in and they probably won't try to sell something to a legitimate business owner in town, saving the legitimate business owner in town the burden of paying out money, because the police department doesn't pay them back when we come down and we take it as stolen property. They're out the money. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the intent. We're gonna put some restrictions on it, so you just can't come in and freelance anonymously. You have to actually say who you are and provide some documentation, and that protects not only the community, it protects the store owner, and it protects the person that lost the property, if that's the case. A legitimate person coming in, they just come in and do their business, and there's no issue with that. They shouldn't have any concerns.
A legitimate person should be entitled to privacy. You shouldn't have to give his name and all information on what he sells, when he sells it, and what he gets paid for. In my personal opinion, is if the police department was doing a better job getting rid of the drug dealers. I see you guys in parking lots all the time, not just once in a while. All the time I see you in parking lots with your engines idling, wasting gas. I know your cars are outfitted with computers. Your officers most likely are browsing the internet instead of in the neighborhood.
Mr. McDonald, does this have anything to do with Articles 23 and 24? Not really. No, it doesn't.
Absolutely does.
No, it doesn't.
If they were controlling the drug dealers, get rid of the drugs, there wouldn't be as many house breaks. And you should be, as a selectman chairman, demanding the manager to get these guys' asses in gear and get something done.
Thank you. Did you have your hand up there behind, sir?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me just apologize for a second. The police department really strives to serve the community, even the minority opinion, okay? And so, as I've expressed to you in the past, if you have specific information, rather than baseless allegation, rumor and innuendo, you want to bring to my attention, my office door is open to you, Mr. McDonald, at any
This is your
time.
office tonight. Town meeting's your office. People deserve to have answers when they're voting on a $78 million budget.
That's correct.
Okay?
That's the correct.
It's not rumors, and it's not allegations. You're in the parking lots. It's obvious.
If
I'm not the only one who sees it. People in town are not blind.
I
We're paying you
understand
some big bucks to get the job done.
Respectfully,
It's
it's-
not getting done.
Respectfully, it's difficult to investigate a crime we don't have any information on. So if you have information on a crime, all I'm telling you is bring it forward. This is not the venue to beat up or have an axe to grind because you have a personal problem with the Wilmington Police Department. This is about budgets. This is about a couple bylaws that the police department is proposed to help protect the citizens and the community. We don't have the luxury of coming in and dishing out misinformation, false information, fictitious information. The police department is held to a standard where we have to actually do our job, and we do the best we possibly can with what we've been given. Sometimes we come to town meeting, and sometimes we would like to have some things that help us do our job, and that's what these kind of requests are. But if you have specific information on something specific, rather than baseless, broad comments that you want to make to discredit my police department and the officers and the men and women that work there on a regular basis, then I encourage you to bring them forward to me. Meet me in my office. I don't typically discuss criminal investigations in public, but I'd be happy to hear what you have to say.
Well, I would simply like to have one question answered. Is it true that we have 3 officers that are being investigated for an alleged crime that was found out by the FBI? Is that such a difficult, it's a yes or no question.
Obviously, you have more information than I have.
All right, Mr. McDonald, thank you. Did you have your hand up behind him? I'm sorry.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, your name and address for the record?
Lou Valenti, I own Valenti Electronics in the Wilmington Recycling Center. And I kind of agree with the chief here, and I've actually worked with the police department on a couple of occasions. My biggest problem is the way this is written. It's written very openly. It says anybody who acquires secondhand goods. Now, we run a recycling center. People drop things off. Christmas tree lights that don't work. Old CRT monitors that are going to end up in a swamp somewhere. There is no provision in here. As well as the Salvation Army, as well as curbside pickup. anybody who acquires something that's of somebody else's personal nature has to go through the whole procedure of licensing, taking photographs, getting documents signed out. I think this should be, and storage of 30 days. Now, will that mean that the Salvation Army, when people drop things off, they will have to take a picture of each item, they will have to get the forms filled out, and they will have to store it on site for 30 days?
Chief, you got that?
Yes, it wouldn't be curbside pickup, is not, I mean, that's not the intention of this bylaw. The intention of this bylaw is not for recycling purposes.
But the problem is it doesn't state here. I would feel a lot better if it stated in writing what it was. I mean, according to this, it's anybody who acquires personal second-hand goods. So curbside pickup, somebody is acquiring a personal second-hand good. And they should have to follow, you talk about consistency, they should have to follow this. The Salvation Army, again, follow this. People selling yard sales could be affected on this. We're even talking about the moolahs, bringing in recycled soda cans.
No, it's respectfully, it's for keepers of shops for the purchase, sale, or barter of such articles. I understand what you're saying, and it might appear that that's the purpose, but that's not the purpose of this bylaw. This bylaw is specifically for the things I articulated earlier, the iPods and things like that. If something's being taken in as a recycle center, and there are areas that recycle computers, Best Buy recycles computers, they bring them in. The purpose of that is recycling. You're not in the business of buying that to resell it. You're in the business of coming in to buy it for the purpose of recycling the product that you have.
Is there anything in this, though, that says that?
But there's nothing.
I would just like to see it amended. I mean, I understand where he's going with it, but it's just a very big umbrella to me, and I would like to see it narrowed down a little bit, where maybe you talk about recycling centers, Salvation Army, things that are being donated, or maybe things that are being acquired of not of a monetary payment. Obviously, a crook is not going to give you something. And I think that should be added in here, and it would help really clarify this up, because, like I say, I mean, yard sales, there's so much, as I read it, that could force you or could force me into getting a license and spending hours taking pictures of people come over with their old computer parts and a hard drive and 3 monitors, and I'm supposed to take pictures of all these, and according to this, it's acquiring secondhand goods.
Gee, I mean, I'm looking at it going to the very beginning of the license and application procedure, and I appreciate the question, but I guess I understand why the concern, but I'm pretty clear to me that it's saying that the Board of Selectmen, upon petition, in its capacity as a licensing authority, can license such persons as is deemed suitable to be dealers of junk and metals and, keepers of shops for purchase and sale, etc. So if we have an application on a license, we can ferret out what's intended to be outside the scope of this thing. We understand that you recycle some computer monitors, for example, recyclables that are not sold in the ordinary course of your business. We don't need you to follow this process. But to the extent you might purchase a computer secondhand and sell it the next day to another guy, well, we want that to fall within the scope of the article in the bylaw. So I think it's a good question, but I do think that there's a process built in here that protects.
Well, I guess the one big thing is if you look at the definition of a dealer, which is very specific. It again mentions that anybody who acquires a second-hand piece of equipment. I think that should be straightened out a little bit. If you acquire a second-hand piece of equipment, you then fall under the dealer category, and then the bylaw applies to you.
Yeah, maybe we can, take those comments under advisement and see if there's a way to clarify it that might make a couple of very specific businesses like the ones you're talking about feel more comfortable. There's nothing to prevent us from doing that. I'm not sure I see the same thing you do, but, if it makes somebody more comfortable and doesn't derogate from the purpose, we can take a look at that.
If I may, to Mr. Valenti's point, I think we all in the room tonight, understand the spirit of this bylaw. And if we were going to implement it tomorrow, would be no problem. It's not us that I'm worried about. I guess I'm worried about our successors 25, 30 years from now, long after I've taken my eye off the ball. It's interpretation of these. Right now, the interpretation is easy. In 30 years, will they know where we were tonight? Yeah, I don't want to make busy work for anybody, but I understand what you're saying.
I sat down, I listened to the chief, and I even read through this very closely, and I actually agree with it 100%. The thing is it's not on paper. And if you retire and somebody else comes in, it could be taken a different way and then enforced in a different way. And even the selectmen do that.
Can I just ask you a question, Mr. Valenti? Is what you are suggesting that it be limited to the purchase or sale as opposed to what I presume you're saying is somebody will come in and they just want to get rid of a computer and so they'll give it to you? They won't sell it to you, is that it?
Exactly like the recycling center.
Right.
We don't charge, we don't pay.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty clear that the chief's intention here is for those people that are engaged in the selling of this material, because somebody's just, and maybe as has been said, we can talk about tweaking this with town council so that we look at, because I understand you're talking about the language under dealer, which says obtaining, acquiring, receiving, but I suspect you have no problem with the words buying, selling.
Matter of fact, I've worked with both detectives very closely in the past. I've done some forensic work for the police. I think they do a terrific job. I've always been treated with courtesy. I've even put out some of my own money and been reimbursed because I'll tell you, beyond what people say, people do come in and say, and I warn them. The form I use, it was done by a lawyer, and I warn them, I'm going to run this by the police. And they say, oh, that's fine, it's not stolen. And it's been run by the police, and it's stolen. They're that brazen out there. So I have no objection with what you're talking about in the spirit of this, but it's it's just the way it's written and the way it could be construed by somebody else that I think that we have to narrow this down. I mean, yes, maybe the person taking in gold, he's taking in 1-2 pieces a day, where you're talking about the Salvation Army, a recycling center, where on a Saturday we could have 20 people in there with boxes of old items, and if it's stolen, believe me, and it's worth value, they're not going to give it to us. So I think maybe the monetary aspect, rather than acquiring, should be rewritten in there. Because if we have to go through, or it's taken by one of the selectmen, or another chief, or something like that, it does leave that whole umbrella open. And the same with the Salvation Army. They get things in. I mean, according to this, they would have to do the same thing, take pictures of every single item, and they obviously are not paying. It's just a box being dropped off.
I think there's a mechanism to possibly amend this at town meeting as well, so those are options. I understand your concerns.
Any other questions or comments from the board or the audience? Mr. Bodnar?
Chief, again, I have to commend you. Your your intent is proper, but as Mr. Valenti explained, it's, like you said, Salvation Army, and what about Ryan's Auction Hall up the street? I mean, wherever they acquire this stuff, they're acquiring it legitimately, and then they're conducting an auction. And are they going to be liable for licensing?
They're licensed under the public auction statutes, and the Board of Selectmen already issues a license for
The
that.
other section I'd like to bring up, 23.2.3, inspections. All second, again, as he said, all second-hand articles, junk, and during business hours shall be open to inspection by officers of the Wilmington Police Department or by any other person authorized by the licensing authority. And again, who is the licensing authority now?
The Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen?
Will this be a new licensing authority, or?
No, the Board of Selectmen acts as the licensing authority. Like they issue licenses for alcohol. I can do administrative, I do administrative inspections in liquor establishments, so to speak. It's not a search per se under the Constitution for the Fourth Amendment, but it's an administrative inspection. We can walk in and check on their operation. We can also look at pharmacies, and this would be no different than that. I come in, I talk to Mr. Valenti, we don't look at your books, we go through, we look at the stuff that's been taken, we cross-check that with information that we have on items that were stolen, and if nothing exists, everything's fine. But we do quite often come across, and Mr. Valenti's, has paid money in the past to individuals and found later that the property was stolen, and I don't expect him to carry that burden either. I'd just rather have that person turn around, walk out the door, and find someplace else to do it, if that's the case.
No, as I stated, if you read this 23.2.3, it's almost like it's a form of invasion of privacy. Refusal to permit inspection. Well, I don't believe Mr. Valenti or anyone else engaged, and/or as he stated, well, the auction hall is exempt because of its licensing. But if you look at the wording on that, you may water it down a little or thin it down.
Our concern is that although there are many, and the majority of individuals engaged in this type of business are completely legitimate, there are individuals in there that, for every 10 things that come in, they might record 2. That exists as well, and we see that quite often in the situation, especially with precious metals like gold and silver and things like that, that they can melt down and get rid of really quickly. There's no record of that stuff that comes through there. And in this kind of, like I said, it's an administrative inspection. It's not a search. We're not going through their pockets and through the building. We're looking at their records, which is kind of a standard operating procedure for most places that have licenses. I mean, the fire department can come in and do an administrative inspection on flammable materials you have in your building under certain guidelines. Like the building inspector does inspections. Those are administrative in purpose. They come in to check to make sure everything's been done properly and to look through that. So it is, I'm not gonna lie, it is extra work for the shop owner, but I think with the protections that it brings for them as well as the community and the assistance to the police department, I think it's a very small burden to place on them. And with respect to the comments that Mr. Valenti made, we can look in that as well.
One last little question. At the present time, short of Mr. Valenti and his business, how many dealers of this type do we have in town at the present time?
We have a few. We have a few. A handful, and a new one just came in. So, it's just one of those things that, this is not something that just Wilmington's done. This is done across the state. These bylaws many towns have them. Lowell has several pawn shops. They have bylaws that control that, and ordinances that control that. Salem, New Hampshire is another big one. They have 11. And they, through their ordinances in Salem, New Hampshire, they coordinate and control the process of this stuff and look at this information.
I realize New Hampshire has a few pawn shops.
Everett, there's a bunch of them. So any place that has this type of operation in their community, once it becomes, the situation where we have in Wilmington, it's time to take a deeper look at it as far as I'm concerned.
Would he be Does he have to hold on to the goods for 30 days if he buys a decent computer or something?
He would have to follow the requirements of the bylaw, so yes.
I mean, again, I'm thinking of him, he has to tie up his money before he can resell it.
Yeah.
Even, I mean, hoping it's a legitimate item, and as Mr. McDonald stated, you're not going to get a thief showing an ID. Although it has happened, a friend of mine up in New Hampshire, he and I were at a pawn shop. He saw his girlfriend's jewelry in there, and it was one of a kind. And of course, the Plastow Police Department, absconded with it. And fortunately, they did have a license picture of the kid's license from April, and everything come out happy except the kid in April.
Sure. I mean, sometimes the inexperienced criminal element will think that distance gives them security. So they won't pawn it here, they'll go to Everett, thinking that we'll never see whatever it has, vice versa. They might pawn it here, or try to sell it here, and then Everett gets to look at it. See, we share this information through all different police communities, and that's how we end up solving these issues. And like I said, there's nothing more satisfying than handing back that 100-year-old brooch to a family who was stolen from that thought they would never see it again, and that does happen.
Thank you.
Chairman, one of the things that I think can't be lost in this discussion tonight as we go back and forth on some of the nuances of the proposed bylaw, and that's that, there are people who have their stuff stolen, that this is a tool to help make them whole. Believe me, there's more than a few guys in our town who have gotten their trades tools stolen in the last couple of years when things are tough. It affects their living. And, I think it's great that the proposed bylaw helps some of these businesses protect themselves. It certainly helps the police doing a more efficient job investigating a crime, if nothing else. We talk about taxpayer money and doing the job. We're trying to make the job easier on the police to return stolen property. So, of all this talk about the burden that it might put on people, the only person that I've heard that's in the business who's weighed in on this is the gentleman that's here tonight, who says that it's a good law. He's got some concerns he'd like us to work on. So that's good enough for me. It's a good law. Let's see if we can address a couple of those concerns.
One more comment is, I understand about taking a photograph of the item that you want. Sometimes items come in that are only about $10 or $15. I think maybe a monetary value of when the photograph should be taken. At times I have people come in, they upgrade their computer, they say, hey, as a matter of fact, I did the upgrade for them, and they say, hey, will you take off, or would you buy these drives from me for $20? They're a good customer of mine, I just did the work. I don't want to insult them by saying I got to take a picture of this and that. So I think maybe even a dollar value on the photographs would help as well, if it's a very small amount, maybe $50 or less.
I think that that's a valid request. Unfortunately, as we start to water this, I wouldn't recommend that we did that, because we start to water it down. What's the value of a Fleetwood Mac CD? I think I'm probably dating myself with that band. But what's the value of that? That's probably, to the individual bringing in to sell it, they're probably only going to get $5 for it. If that, $3 for it. But when we've had a rash of car breaks, and in total, we probably have an investment of the victim of a couple $1,000s in CDs, it adds up to them. So if we're able to, I understand it's a burden and it's extra paperwork. If they're really interested in selling the stuff, they'll fill out the paperwork. And all the shop owner has to make sure that it's done properly and that the information is
It's not so much the paperwork, it's the photograph.
Sure.
If I may, Chief, I think there's also the sentimental value aspect, right? The sentimental value, which may be infinite can't really account for a $5 item. You know, $5 retail value on the street doesn't account for the fact that my grandmother gave it to me, you know, so that's another aspect of it.
Thank you. Jane?
Jane Miller, Town Crier. Really briefly, does this bylaw apply to home jewelry sales where they go in and they do a home party and they, you know, women sell their unused gold to a person that comes into their house? That person doesn't keep a shop.
You know, I think it would have some implications, but that's not the tenet of the bylaw. It's for the shop that's standing up, you know what I mean, that has an address and a location. You know, a lot of things happen in people's private homes that, you know, we're not looking to bust down your door and take notice of in those situations. We do have plenty to do so.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes, I just want to point something out. First of all, an arrest isn't a conviction. And I think it was Mr. Blotter that brought up a good point, that he was at a flea market or an auction, and somebody actually did give their name as to selling that item. So
Good thing they have this kind of bylaw in that town, isn't it?
maybe not, because I'll tell you what, okay? You get a situation where somebody who bought something secondhand wasn't the one who stole it, received the stolen goods from somebody he didn't know, then takes it to the pawn shop, sells it. He's not guilty of stealing anything. And then you go arrest an innocent guy. And then it goes to court. This article is a messy article, and messy articles or bylaws cost us money in legal fees.
You good? We all set? Thank you.
Thank you.
Communications.
Mr. Chairman, you have a memorandum from Senator Tarr regarding an update on Chapter 90 road and bridge funding. He's just indicating to you that the governor's original bill had been heard by the Joint Committee on Transportation on March 9th and allocated $200 million to maintain and improve local roads and bridges. And he's indicated as well that the committee's responded favorably to requests from various organizations, and they voted to approve and release a redrafted version of House Bill 1854 that authorizes $250 million in capital expenditures. It still hasn't been signed into law. That the governor will have the determination to make as to how much money will actually be spent under the Chapter 90 program, and by law he has until April 1st to give cities and towns preliminary notice of the amount of Chapter 90 funding that he will receive. You also have a rather lengthy piece of correspondence from the Massachusetts Municipal Association reiterating the MMA's position that they are in favor of the health insurance reform, that there is no conflict of interest, despite the fact that they are involved in municipal health insurance through the Maya program, and that they again are suggesting that comments from those that are opposed to changes in health insurance are raising the specter of a potential conflict as really a red herring in this matter, attempting to distract attention away from the real issues that the MMA has set forward through its members in general municipal policy. The MMA's position is that cities and towns should have as many options and choices as possible, including joining the GIC if that is in the best interest of the particular community. And they also believe that the towns and cities should have the option and power to do so without the burden of collective bargaining. We have a correspondence from Stephen Cohen, the State Fire Marshal, regarding changes to Fire Safety Code as it pertains to requirements for managing the operation of places of assembly. Again, he's written this letter to all the various licensing authorities. You will recall that there was sweeping legislation that was enacted regarding fire safety requirements, particularly with respect to nightclubs, dance halls, discotheques, and bars. And those changes to the fire code have in fact been implemented relative to the requirement for the installation of automatic sprinklers in places of assembly with a capacity of 100 people or more. These are specific to the responsibility of the manager, and they are saying that effective on June 1st, 2011, any of the licenses that are issued must include the designation of a crowd manager who is present in the facility during all hours that the facility is open to the public, and it also provides requirements for training and testing to become a crowd manager. The board has...
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I just want to ask, I presume that the fire department is proactive in somehow contacting all the Coors license holders in the town?
Fire department and the building inspector.
And the building inspector both, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. That'd be helpful, especially to the nonprofits. Thank you.
The board has its annual letter from the Metropolitan Boston Emergency Medical Services Council seeking nomination of any candidates for membership to that board of directors. This information is provided to the fire department. The EMS Services Council serves about 61 communities in metropolitan Boston, including the town of Wilmington. The board is being asked to consider a request of the Wilmington Garden Club to use the town common on Saturday, May 7th of this year from 8:30 a.m. to noon for their annual plant sale. And you have a letter to that effect from Marilyn Penny, the secretary of the Garden Club.
Any conflicts on the common that day?
No.
Questions, comments, or motion?
I move to grant the request.
Second?
Motion made and second. All in favor? Unanimous?
Board has a request also from Deanna Wright of the Boutwell Early Childhood Center PAC to use the municipal parking lot on Middlesex Avenue across from the town common for the purpose of a yard sale fundraiser. This is an event they've had in the past. This would be on Saturday, May 21st from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m.
And there's no conflicts,
There would
obviously.
be no problem with that.
And what about the rain date?
The rain date would create an issue, and so we would be specific to the 21st.
Okay. Any questions, comments, or motion?
Move to grant the request for May 21st from 9 to 1. I guess we'll leave it at that.
I'll second the motion.
Motion made and second. All in favor? Unanimous?
Wish you good luck with the weather.
Yes, good.
Indeed.
The board is being asked to consider the request of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph O'Neill to use the town common and to conduct a road race walk on behalf of the Justin O'Neill Scholarship Fund on Sunday, May 22nd, 2011. Again, this has been an event that has taken place the last several years. It did switch over to the fall at one point, but they'd like to see it back on the
Any conflicts?
Right.
Almost?
We're getting closer. There is other events going on. For example, there is one, the Pan Mass Challenge bike ride for kids, but that's being held over at the middle school complex on Carter Lane. So this would not be a conflict. The week prior, the Sunday prior, is when the Women of Wilmington are having their race for Wilmington. So there would be no objection to this.
Okay, questions, comments, or a motion?
Move to grant the request.
Second.
Motion made and second. All in favor? Unanimous?
Board is being asked to consider the request from Recreation Commission to use the town common to conduct the annual Easter egg hunt, which would be on Saturday, April 23rd, beginning at 2 p.m. sharp. And you have a letter to that effect from the Recreation Director, Deborah Cipriani.
And I take it there's no...
Not a problem. Well, that's the date of the election, the local election, but nobody's voting on the town common or at the high school, so it shouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
Great day for visibility.
Questions, comments, or a motion?
I'll make the motion that we grant the Recreation Commission the use of the town common for the annual Easter egg hunt on Saturday, April 23rd at 2 p.m.
That's 2, okay.
Sharp. Second.
Motion made second. All in favor? Unanimous?
Mr. Chairman, we have the request to renew the taxi cab license for Wilmington Taxi. We have received a memorandum from the police chief indicating that the department recommends approval of the application for the taxi cab owner's permit from Timothy J. Flynn of Wilmington Taxi. His review has determined that there is no evidence to hinder that license from being granted.
Okay, questions, comments, or a motion?
Move to grant the request.
I'll second the motion.
Motion made and second, all in favor? Unanimous?
And also, toward that end, Mr. Chairman, the board is being asked to consider the renewal of the taxi cab operator's license specifically for Timothy J. Flynn. And again, the chief has made his review, and the department recommends approval as well of the application for taxi cab driver's permit as requested by Mr. Flynn, indicating that the review of Mr. Flynn has determined that there's no evidence to hinder that license from being granted.
Okay. Questions, comments, or motion?
I'll move to grant the request as highlighted by the manager.
I'll second the motion.
Motion made, second, all in favor? Unanimous? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes the regular business before the board.
Public comments? Mr. Nelson?
Mark Nelson, 6 Polk Street. I have a question and a comment. The question is it true that the Board of Selectmen have completely broken off negotiations to purchase the farm on Andover Street?
Broken off negotiations to purchase the farm on Andover Street?
Correct. Last week, the town manager stated that there was a $7.5 million offer for 62.5 acres. I don't know if the negotiations were ongoing or if that's just an option that's off the table.
I don't know if anything's off the table for any purpose, but I would offer that we are not in active negotiations. I did reach out to the council and did not receive a response indicating any interest. The dollar amount that was referenced was the last time that there was activity on that site. That was the dollar amount listed.
Oh, I did a little more research, and the Registry of Deeds indicates that there's actually 75 3/4 acres, and that 10 of those acres are in Andover. So that would figure out that it's $100,000 per acre, which, you know, given the possibility of a model school program and the fact that the town owns 30 acres that abuts this, it just seems like a shame to, you know, I think the negotiation should open up, and I have a copy of the assessors map here if you want to pass it around.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, everything, I would agree with everything that the manager recited historically, but to provide a little bit more detail, when you start talking about numbers that were on the table, that was for a third-party private enterprise, which the town was aware of negotiations. Since that third party terminated their interest in the property, the town has, on occasion, and I would say regularly, attempted to reach out to counsel representing the family, and the manager accurately related the fact he had reached out to counsel. But just to be clear, the town on a fairly regular basis has reached out to representatives of the 2 family units who own that property. And at no point in recent history have we had a willing seller come to the table to want to put together a deal with the town. So, you know, there hasn't been any active negotiations, and that we haven't had to do so would be like trying to play tennis with yourself. I mean, we just, every now and again, we hit the ball over the net, nobody hits it back. With respect to a model school and that whole process, I mean, you know, again, the town meeting, by an overwhelming vote, directed the town to go look at all viable options for a school that would take advantage of a, you know, roundabout a 50% reimbursement from the state. Even if the town were interested in looking at a taking for that property, which nobody has, expressed that interest, that's not a viable option given the time frame that we're dealing under here. So, just so that people understand, when you start talking about a model school, that is a process that is driven by the Commonwealth through MSBA when the town has readily available, a site which you can take some plans off the shelf and plop it on this site that's available. Without a willing seller, that site's not a viable option for the town at this time.
So, well, I also know that that property is a Chapter 60 agricultural exempt, where if they were to try to change the zone of that the town would have the first option to purchase that. So, in my opinion, it just seems like it'd be a perfect opportunity for the town to get serious, sit down with these people, try to purchase the property, if not the whole thing, half of it that abuts the 30 acres that the water department owns, and move forward with a model school, being that the state has a clock that's ticking on this whole process. And I believe that the reimbursement on a model school is 60%, which is what Tewksbury's done, which in turn was, I think their final bid was $66 million. So they were reimbursed 60%, so the final cost is somewhere around $24 million for a model school that won't have any effect on the neighbors or the students, and just the savings alone would pay for the property. And that's you know.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would say that it wouldn't have any effect on the neighbors. There might be quite a few neighbors up in the Andover Street area that disagree with that. But aside from that, what I don't want anybody to be left, the wrong impression that I wouldn't want people to be left with is that the town hasn't looked at that property or expressed any interest in it. The fact of the matter is we have. The fact of the matter is that the owners of the property who have counsel representing them, on occasion, we reach out to them just to try and explore some interest, not necessarily for school, for any municipal purpose. And to this point in time, we don't have another party on the other side of the table who's expressed an interest in negotiating. It's that simple. It's that the town hasn't taken it seriously. It's not that the town hasn't explored that. It's that the town has nobody to negotiate with on the other side. It's that simple. You can't force people to the table.
That it was 62.5 acres, and when there's actually 75 acres.
Could I just add a couple things? Number one is the acreage is the 60 or so acres are the acres that are in Wilmington. Number two is the 30 acres that you're talking about that the town owns, or the water department land, which town council has determined is Chapter 97. Therefore, we would not have that land at our disposal, and as some members of this board, at least two members of the board anyways, and will recall that we had discussions about that several years ago. So that's not available to us. And further, with regard to the model school, you need to be invited by the MSBA. You need to own the property. That price, whatever it is that would be ultimately be negotiated with a private enterprise, whether it's the owners of the farm or any place else, would not be reimbursed by the state. That's not a reimbursable expense. With regard to the figures from Tewksbury, I don't know them. I mean, they haven't built the building yet, so I'm not sure that that's going to be the final amount of money. I hope it is. I wish them the best of luck for that. But they did not have to acquire additional property, and if they had, that additional property, just as the property you're suggesting, would not be reimbursed by the state.
As far as the reimbursement, just the 60% instead of the 50% would cover what the cost of the property would be.
Well, I don't know that yet. I mean, I don't know that how you know that, because I don't know that.
Ashland had bids, Hudson had bids.
That's fine, but we haven't gone through that bid process yet, and that's what this whole, as many of the members of the Board of Selectmen have stated and restated, that's what this whole feasibility study is intended to do, and we will look at the different options and the different costs. Also, people are suggesting that the reimbursement rate is going to be 50%. We don't know whether it's going to be 52 or 53, as was stated most recently, and we can have further discussions about that.
West Springfield was 8%.
Well, West Springfield has the EQV and the demographics that warrant them to get 60%. I'm sure a new high school in Wellesley is probably going to get less than 50%. That's how it works.
And as far as the town water property, that would at least give you frontage to 125, so you could construct an access to the back portion to actually construct the school, and possibly even extend some of the property for well fields.
Are you familiar with Chapter 97 land?
No, I'm not at all.
Okay.
But I'll look at it.
Yes,
Maybe.
I mean, it's actually Article 97 land, but the fact of the matter is to do anything with that land would require a three-step process. It would require two-thirds vote at town meeting, it would require a vote of the Conservation Commission, which I believe needs to be unanimous, I may stand corrected, and then it needs a vote of the state legislature. So again, all of these things in the abstract sound appealing, but when you're looking at the opportunity of obtaining around about 50% reimbursement, that land is not readily available to the town. It is not a potential site for a model school.
Well, I would just ask that maybe the board approach the people one last time, because it's a perfect example of a model school. If those other three steps could be taken care of handily enough, and the current high school, even though it's outgrown its use as a school, it'd make a great town hall.
Yep.
Just an opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the town, I think, will continue to reach out over time to the owners of the property.
I took a tour with Superintendent Benton, and there's nothing the matter with the building. So that's why I say that, and I did my homework and a little more investigation, and I think it'd just be a shame to miss an ideal opportunity where if the town did buy it now and maybe put a school in that particular location, that the property owners could come back with a prospective buyer to put in townhouses or condos, and at a crazy fee, where the town would not have the money at that point to purchase the property, where it has first opportunity to purchase the property, being that it's Chapter 60 at the moment. And I'll just leave it at that.
Again, I mean, I'm just telling you from the standpoint of the high school project, that ship has sailed. That's not a viable option at this point. Well, I've been involved with the process. I understand you've just gone to the high school and checked out the high school, and you're becoming, interested in these things and starting to do your homework. I've been involved in those meetings for 2-3 years now. It's been talked about, it's been discussed, it's been explored, and that ship has sailed. But we're going to continue looking at the property. If we ever have an interested party on the other side, then I agree with you that that's a property the town should continue to look at.
I hope you knock on their door again.
Moreover, yeah, Mr. Chairman, just quickly, I just want to make a quick comment. I supported the feasibility study last year, and I like to look at all the options, and I'm going to let the professionals do what they need to do, and then obviously make the most informed decision. And I think people want choice, and once again, it's going to take another 6 to 9 months to get to that point. So I'm just want to sit back and see what is going to be presented by me, and I'm not a professional as far as being an architect, but I like to see what's coming back to us. And I think in due time, we're going to see that.
Well, with a model school, the plans are already done. It's not like you'd have to have a custom design and then get into the demolition of a perfectly fine building. That's how I look at it, Mike.
I understand the comments about the model school, and I too agree that it would be nice to have a model school, but I'm not a professional, and I have to take the information from the committee or from the professionals and what we can actually do, and basically, how many dollars are we going to get from the state? I think that's crucial. It depends on what is the state going to do for us. We need to look at everything before we make that decision. Thank you.
All I was going to say was, the town, we haven't made any secret of the fact that we've been undergoing the feasibility study and the needs analysis and all of this process for, I don't know, 8 years? I don't know how long it's been since it's the origin of the concept, at least 5 anyway. So it's been out there, and it's been known that we've had a desire to research what our options are, and during that time there have been at least a couple, just in the short time that I've been on the Board of Selectmen, where we have sent a tennis ball over the fence at the owners of the farm with no response back. So to me it feels like, they know that we're undergoing this high school project, and they understand that there's opportunity potentially. If I was representing the owners of that land, I would probably be advising them to at least engage in conversation. It may be, as Mr. Newhouse says, that ship may have sailed by now in terms of the timelines, but I'm surprised they haven't come to the fence. So frankly, it seems like there's no interest. We're probably barking up the wrong tree, and it's regrettable because it would have been nice 2-3 years ago if we could have sat down and had some good substantive dialogue and maybe some negotiation. I'm afraid that that the time probably has passed us.
Well, from what I understand, it was just recently taken off as an option, that it wasn't, there were 8 options, and that it was just recently removed as an option.
I think because we're at the point now in terms of the consideration. I'm not on the committee, so I don't want to speak for folks that are, but my understanding is that where we are in this process, if we're going to hold true to the schedule that is by and large dictated by the MSBA, we can only consider property that we in fact own at the time that we're engaged in the process. We don't own the land.
And at the same time, I think the committee would, if they knew that you were close to cutting a deal, that they'd be willing to work with you, the state. Because I think they prefer a model school versus a custom design.
I'm not aware that they prefer a model school. I know that they have to invite a town or a city to build a model school. We've not been invited for obvious reasons. We don't in our inventory of we don't own any property which lends itself to cookie cutter off the shelf building design.
No, this property would be the spot for sure. Just an opinion. But thank you for your time.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes, I was at the meeting the other night when the town was discussing options for a high school. And one of the things that disturbs me is that we're spending $1 million, and the people that are hired to design the building are designing it for 960 students. 960 students. I would have thought that the selectmen, or more importantly, our school superintendent, would have did something that was very, very simple, which is what I did. Go down to the library, take yearbooks, and count the students to see how many students graduated. And she would have found that there are about 1,200 students that could be educated at Wilmington High School. Just for example, 1977, 1978, 1979, 1980, the total amount of graduating students were 1,156 students. The current enrollment for the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade in Wilmington totals 1,199 students. There are 4 consecutive years.
The 70s?
From 1977 to 1980, there were 1,156 students. Now currently, the current students who are enrolled in grades 4 through 7 total 1,199 students. Those would be the students that would be going to the high school, not even including new growth. So it's disturbing to me that a company is being paid $1 million and they don't even know how many students to design a school for.
Can we speak to that, because this is just...
Yeah.
No.
First of all, you said your piece, and let you go on a little bit longer there, but if you were at that meeting, I'm sure there's a lot of different things that go into their planning and paying for and funding a new high school. So, Mr. Kyra's on that committee.
There's a very rigid formula that has to go in to the MSBA to determine what the number of students are going to be. And it isn't simply by opening yearbooks and counting numbers from years past, or by determining that 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th graders are going to then be transferred into 9 through 12. Because many of those 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th graders aren't going to go to the high school, as we've seen. We have about 260 kids who go to Shawshene Tech, but they did go to the elementary school and the middle school when they were here in Wilmington, but then they migrated to other schools. Those same children, many of them also will go to other private schools and take that option. So there is there's a demographic study that's done. It takes into consideration enrollments, it takes into consideration building growth or lack thereof, and then there is a determination made by the MSBA as to what your ultimate total is going to be. They're the ones that have said to the town of Wilmington, based upon their staff, we've looked at all of your enrollment projections which had to be done by certified consultants approved by the MSBA, and we've determined that this is the size of your high school. This is what your high school could be. So it might sound like it's a good idea to count up the numbers in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, but that's not the way it's done. That's not the way it's done. People leave.
People come, people move in.
Well, that's all looked at. That's looked at in terms of birth rates. It's looked at in terms of the census, all of that is put into this formula, and then they determine what the number is going to be, and that's what's been done. And you can talk to people from Tewksbury or Woburn or any place else around the area that has built schools, and that's the way it gets done.
Logic, Mr. Kyron.
Well, I'm talking, you can...
It's not logic.
That's your logic. You're talking
Why would you design a
your
school
logic.
for less students than our school has educated?
We're
Millions and millions of dollars being spent to build a new
Because
school.
you're suggesting that because when you went to school there, or when I went to school there in 1967, when there were 1,200 kids at the school, that it's the same kinds of standards. It's not. It's not the same kind of standards anymore. And you were at that meeting when they told you, for example, about the size of class size in terms of square footage for rooms. That, sure, we can go ahead and just decide to leave everything the same and do some fix-up, but we're not going to get any MSBA reimbursement because we're not going to meet their standards. They're not going to reimburse us if we want to continue to have 540 square foot classrooms when the standard is 850. They're not going to reimburse us if we want to have substandard laboratories and substandard performing arts spaces and everything else that was mentioned at that meeting and will be mentioned again on April 12th. So I understand that you have a different perspective, and you believe that if something was done 30 years ago, then it still should be able to be done the same way today. That's not the case.
This is the point, okay? We're not talking class size as far as square footage. We're talking number of students. Why in the world would somebody pay millions and millions of dollars?
He just explained to you the whole process.
No, he didn't explain
Yes, he
about the
did.
amount of
Yes, he
students.
did.
He did not.
Yes, he did.
He explained square footage.
No.
We're talking millions of dollars for a new school that's going to educate
Okay.
less students.
Okay.
Here's the paper right here. I'll submit it to the board. You can go down to the library and count the students yourself if you don't believe me.
Thank you. Any other public comments? New business committee reports?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would like to discuss under new business, all right? I got a quick comment, I'll be a minute. You know, when we talk here, it's politics. In the supermarket aisles, the streets, at gathering, it's politics. People say to me, you've extended the olive branch more to anyone on the Board of Selectmen. I've stated many times that we have a difference of opinion, but yet we get the people's business done. In all of my 21 years as a selectman, it's perhaps one of the most civil boards I've ever served on. The most frequent question asked of me today is, why are there 3 sitting members on the Board of Selectmen supporting your opponent, Judy O'Connell? I shrug it off and say, it's politics. In 21 years as a selectman, I have never seen 3 sitting selectmen do that, especially when 2 incumbents are up for re-election. I have no problem with that. It's America, and you can support whoever you want. The one selectman I take issue with is Selectman Mike Shampoo. When we were in executive session a couple of months ago, you stated to me that if I didn't support the town manager's pay raise, which by the way, you led the charge, that I would have a tough time getting re-elected. I looked at you and said nothing with a smile. However, tonight, I look at you and I say, now that you are supporting a candidate against me, I'm going to make you eat those words on election night when I win. believe me, I would have never brought this up. As far as the town manager's pay raise is concerned, I did put an offer on the table, more in line with the town employees and most Americans, which was 0 the first year, 3% the second, 3% the next, and it was rejected. What he did receive was 0 the first, just under 8 the second, and 0 the third, which brought his pay from $129,535.12 to $140,000. I have no issue with the town manager. He took what was offered to him. And I just say that. Thank you, that's it.
Something else?
No, I mean, you know, for my part, I've had conversation with Mr. McCoy, and one of the statements that he just made, he made to me. You know, it's a free country. You support who you want to support. So, that'll do for now, I guess. In terms of the manager's contract, I think we've been there, done that. I'm comfortable with the course of action that we took. I think it made sense, and that's it.
Ray?
I don't know if I should speak in this one or not. I'm the guy in the middle again on this one. I did support the manager, and I still will support the manager. I don't regret voting for his pay raise. I've said it many a times. I don't want to make an issue of it. I'm not afraid to go into this election and take the fall if it means that because of his pay raise. I can go out the door feeling they did the right thing. So I'm going to leave it at that on that part of it. As far as Mr. McCoy, I mean, we're getting it all out in the air. I guess it's election time. I can see what he's saying, 3 men, 3 selectmen, and, you know, possibly working for the one candidate. But again, as Mr. Newhouse said, that's your free and choice. So therefore, again, being in the selectmen's race, that's my prerogative to go out there and win the election and get one of the 2 seats. And I guess I can only take that also. And I will also end it with this, that at any given time that I've been in this seat, I've always did my best for the intent of this community. And so I've always been the one that has to go out there and do it myself, only for myself. And if I make the wrong judgment, then I pay the price by the voters of you, the community. So I will leave it at that. And I don't want to make a body of selectmen go and have to fight with each other. It's election time. We can run our own campaigns. We do a good job up here working together, and hopefully we can continue on. We don't have to agree on everything, but at the end results, it's civil. And I hope to leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I agree with that comment, and Mr. McCoy, I agree with you. We have had civil dialogue and discussions, and we've had differences of opinions over the past couple of years. But in spite of any differences that we've ever had, which were discussion or policy differences, I've never had an ill feeling towards you, and I hope you know that. Regardless of how this election goes, and I'll talk about that in a moment. I say it publicly, and I would say it to you personally. I'm fond of you as a person. I think you're a very good man, and you deserve all the credit that anyone would want to extend to you for your years of service to the town. I am not, in any way, shape, or form, supporting Judy against you or against Mr. Lepore. I make no false claims here. I am indeed supporting Ms. O'Connell. I think she's a very qualified woman, and I don't want to turn this into a forum to run her campaign for her. She's doing a fine job. But I do believe that she would be an asset to the town and an asset to this Board of Selectmen. Now, that said, I have 2 votes to cast, and I can do with them as I see fit. You can probably tell what I'm doing with one of those. I'm not making any public comment or any announcement about what I'm doing with the second vote. That's between me and the booths. I just, with regards to the town manager's contract and all that, frankly, you know what, it was, when the comment that I made to you in executive session was based on the fact that I believe that the direction that we were taking in approving the town manager's contract was good for the town of Wilmington, good for the people of Wilmington, and that the people of Wilmington would come to realize that, and that I felt, and I still do, frankly, that your opposition to making that decision and keeping Mr. Kyra on staff for a couple of years instead of one, could be perceived as not being a great set of judgment. That's all. So if the voters think I'm wrong, then we'll find out. We'll find out next year if I choose to run for re-election. If the contrary is true, then we'll find out in another way. But we're going to go our separate ways this evening, and I go out considering you a friend and still a colleague. And at the end of the election, if Judy's sitting up here and Mr. Lepore is not, I hope that we'll be able to still be colleagues and have the same kind of conversations and debate and deliberation that we've always had in a professional, courteous manner. And if it's with Mr. Lepore and not you, same statement holds. So to me, there never has, and there is not anything personal with anybody on the board. It's, as you said, it's politics. And unfortunately, you have to sort of make choices. And I believe that Judy would be an asset to the board, and that's why my support is behind her. And that's where I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. I wouldn't probably have had it without you bringing it up, but now that you have, I think the air is clear.
I'll just say I appreciate your honesty relative to the executive session, but I will say that I did support the town manager's appointment. Obviously, we have a different philosophy other than that, and I'll end it at that. I think you know me by now, and I just don't get intimidated. And I know there's an election going on, and when you make a comment like that I probably have a difficult time getting reelected by not supporting it, I take issue with that. I appreciate your honesty in admitting that, and I look forward to the election, and what happens, happens. That's all. Thank you.
Board dates? No, we're done with public comments.
April
Because that was
1st,
before.
I'm sorry. April 1st is the last day to register to vote, and the town election and town meeting for those who are not already registered. The town clerk's office will be open until 8 p.m. on that day, and passport services will be available. Also that evening, the Wilmington Educational Foundation will be holding their annual vendor fair night. That's at the Knights of Columbus Hall from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. On Saturday of this week, April 2nd, the Board of Health will conduct its rabies clinic at the Public Buildings Department on Church Street from noon to 2 p.m. Please have dogs on a leash and cats in a carrier. The cost is $10 per animal. The board next meets on April 11th, but also advance notice that on April 12th is the forum, the first of at least 3 public forums, in addition to the high school building committee meetings, which are all public, as you learned this evening. Some folks have been attending. This will be a public information meeting to be held at the high school auditorium Tuesday, April 12th at 6:30 p.m.
Very good, thank you. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion made, second, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you.